Good evening and welcome. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome everyone. First tonight, I'd like to observe a minute of silence in deference to the tragedy in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you. I think the second order of business tonight ought to be a very big thank you to our community, which once again came out in outstanding support of this school district. And one of the things I know is if you want to have an outstanding school, you need a supportive community, and we certainly have that. Joe?
Yep. Just to echo those sentiments, we can't thank the community enough for all of their support. Certainly our students and our staff who did their best to get the right information out there, all of the publications team, our cabinet, for getting the information out to our community so they can make an informed decision. Nearly 75% approval is something certainly to be proud of, and we're excited about the next steps for this district, given the passage of that historic multi-year capital improvement plan. So thank you, Baldwinsville community.
Yes, and again, thank you to, I think, a round of applause for thank you for that cue, Sam. And thank you to Dr. Barbary and his staff, and we even had students involved in the videos, so it certainly was a group effort, but they really communicated the project, and I think if you communicate a good idea, you usually get support for it, so wonderful, thank you. So moving on with our work session, then, oh yes, do we have a roll call? Yours, okay?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess we're moving on with our work session. Joe, you have the floor for a couple of presentations.
Yes, so our first presentation, we have Don Weber from Onondaga County, who is going to walk us through the property tax exemptions and the impact on our district. We know that the board's received quite a few emails from community members over the last year to most recently the last month regarding tax exemption. So we thought it was important. We've been promising folks that we would have this discussion as we developed our budget for the 25-26 school year. So Don is the expert, and I will turn things over to him, and he'll walk us through, and please ask questions throughout. And again, this will be a continuation. We'll follow up at our next work session in January to ultimately come to some resolution of where we stand as we move forward.
Thank you. The button on the All right. Thank you for having me. So I prepared a little slideshow here, but I guess just to kind of steal my thunder, there are three. Just slide. Scroll. Oh. There you go. So there are three property tax exemptions I want to talk to you all about. And these exemptions are all set by or governed by state law, so all the school districts, towns, and the county are kind of dealing with the same thing. The main one, or the first one, I guess, is the senior citizen limited income exemption, and the companion exemption that goes with that, the disability low income exemption. The income threshold for that exemption hasn't been allowed by the state of New York to increase since 2006. In 2022, they allowed schools, towns, counties, cities, and villages all to make their own determinations about whether or not they want to increase the income threshold to qualify for this exemption. So the previous threshold had a maximum of $37,400 in qualifying income in order to get some level of benefit. It's been increased now to a maximum of $58,400. So you can go as high as that. Onondaga County County has done that already. They did that last year. And our property owners will see the benefit of that on their upcoming January town and county tax bill. The next exemption is military veterans exemption. There's a local option for school districts to allow that as well. You don't have to. Only 2 school districts in the county allow it to a very small degree, so it's not something that's common. And then the volunteer firefighter ambulance worker exemption. We had an exemption on the books for this for years. It was wasn't a very generous exemption. The state has been allows us now to offer up to a 10% property tax exemption, so we'll talk about that as well. And if at any point I say anything you don't understand or have questions, please stop me and ask. So starting off, the senior citizen exemption on the left shows the prior maximum income limits. Was a sliding scale exemption. If you made less than $29,000, you got 50% off of your assessment. Right? So whether you're assessed for $100,000 or $500,000, you get 50% off. The new maximum guidelines are on the right, the ones that the county has adopted. So,
Don, can you assess? So you could set in between those max.
yes, you can go in between. If you wanted to phase it in over a number of years, you have that option. So one of the most important things to know is that you wouldn't see any loss in revenue. Right? You're going to get the same amount of money for property taxes that you got before. You're just going to get it from different folks. So if you allow more people to be exempt, everybody else is going to pay a little bit more. At the end of the day, the district is going to see the same amount of revenue. Effectively, it's going to increase your tax rate. Is what it's going to do. So anybody who currently has the exemption at all, because of the way that the guidelines are set up, would now qualify for the full 50% exemption. And this analysis that I've done is assuming that you go max the county to the full extent. So you currently, and what I did is I looked at the folks who were going to get this exemption on their upcoming January town and county tax bill, and I said, well, what would have happened to the school tax bill that just went out this past September had they had this increased benefit on it? So I'm not trying to predict the future, we're kind of looking to see what would have happened in the past. So on the assessment roll for the district, there were 343 properties receiving the exemption. Would have had 969 people qualify for it. An increase of 626 folks. This is a combination of the senior citizen and disability exemptions because generally they work in tandem, although they are 2 different exemptions. There are only 39 disability low-income exemptions within the school district. We're the only school district that does not currently allow the disability low-income exemption. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or an oversight many years ago, but something to consider, I think, at this point, just for uniformity.
So do I understand correctly, we allow the income, but no additional for disability and low income, is that?
You allow the exemption for senior citizens with low incomes, but not for disabled folks who may not be seniors. They may be, 35 years old, but they have, they would otherwise be the income limits.
Okay, thank you.
And again, not a large universe of folks. Along with deciding whether or not to allow this or to increase the income limits for this exemption, there are other local options within the real property tax law for you to consider. When the state allowed us to increase the income limits, they also changed within the New York State real property tax law what is defined as income for the purposes of this exemption. I think that the intention was to more closely align it with what's income, what they consider income for the enhanced STAR exemption, which makes sense. But the old definition for this exemption was everything. You find $5 on the sidewalk, we're counting it as your income. So now you would have to decide whether or not certain things like IRA distributions are going to be included as income. By default, they are not. The Onondaga County Legislature decided to specifically include them as income because I think that they felt if somebody's making $25,000 a year, but they're pulling $100,000 out of their IRA, they're probably not the intended target for this exemption. They're not necessarily low income in their mind. I personally think for these exemptions, consistency is important. You know, if you have a property owner coming to the assessor's office and they're saying, well, I live in this school district, but I'm in this town, or I live in this town with that school district, and what is considered income for neighbors within the same neighborhood, it just gets really confusing. So it's nice to all be on the same page, but you don't have to do that. Because the income limits were not allowed by the state to increase in many years, again, since 2006, over the years they did do some things like allow school districts, counties, schools, to offer the option to allow property owners to deduct unreimbursed medical expenses from their income. So in reality, what would happen is seniors would bring boxes of receipts to the town assessor's office, and they apply for this exemption every year. This exemption requires annual renewal every year to try to knock down their income to get a greater exemption. That is, I think, burdensome for property owners and the town assessors as well. I would recommend, if you're going to increase the income limits, that if you do allow a deduction for medical exemptions, you actively get rid of that. And you would have to state that in the resolution. So if it's on the books already, you would have to say we're no longer going to allow a deduction for unreimbursed medical expenses. And this is our first slide here. So what would happen if you were to allow this exemption, dollars-wise? So for county tax purposes, there are $75.7 million worth of exemptions on the upcoming county tax roll, just attributable to this one, to the senior citizen disabled exemption. There were $21.3 million on the school tax roll. So had you had the increased limits at school time, you would have lost $54.4 million off your tax roll. So at school tax time, you raised $65.77 billion in school taxes with a taxable assessed value of the district, $3.9 billion, and a school tax rate of 16.82. Had you lost $54 million in taxable value, the school tax rate, the full value tax rate, would have been $17.06. Right? So you would have seen everybody else would have paid a little bit more. What does that work out to? $23.74 per 100,000 of assessed value. So if you had a property that was worth $100,000, that property owner would have paid about $24 more. $300,000 house, which is what houses go for these days, I think, about $71.22. Make sense? Piece of cake. This slide, I don't know how useful this is, but what does that really mean? How much money are we shifting around from the folks who are paying to the folks who are not paying? About $915,000. I will just say for that exemption, you do need to pass a resolution. It can't just be a board vote. It's got to be a resolution that you need to spell out, and it has to be done before March 1st. Otherwise, it won't apply to this upcoming September 25-26 school tax bill. Second exemption, if nobody has any questions, is for the veterans.
I have a quick question,
Of course.
if I may, I'm sorry. As I was looking up that exemption, the point was made in the articles that I was reading is that it was quite onerous to apply for the exemption. But they were talking about things like medical bills and things like that. So if we don't adopt the medical bill requirement, how onerous is it to apply for these exemptions? And the numbers that you indicated, would all of those people just automatically qualify, or would they have to reapply?
This exemption requires annual renewal. So seniors do have to physically, most of them physically go there because they don't trust, they want to make sure it gets done. And they line up outside the assessor's office every year before March 1st. So just by virtual, you don't have any control over that. That's how this exemption works because it is based on income. They have to bring their tax returns to the town assessor's office every year. It's a difficult exemption to administer, honestly. And in the middle of winter, it's just, I wish there was a better way, but that's what we have for now until the state law changes.
And so the numbers that you reported are the numbers of seniors who take advantage of it currently, under the current levels, is that right?
Yes.
And so that's your best estimate of how many would take advantage of it under the new levels?
Because the county has already adopted the increased limits, there are folks that live in the district that are gonna get that exemption. They're just not gonna get it on their school bill, they're gonna get it on their county bill. So there are 969 folks who physically live within the borders of the district who did line up, who took the time and went, lined up. But, all right, we'll give it to you off your county bill, but you don't meet the guidelines for school, sorry. So they already went there. The nice thing is they've already applied. So we really just have to flip a switch and say, all right, now you're getting it for school too.
Okay, thank you.
So the veterans exemption, this one has been around, we've had the option to adopt this for some time now. Most school districts haven't. I figured we're here, let's talk about it. So there's a an exemption for veterans. The county and all the towns allow it already. School districts have the option to allow it. Only West Genesee and Lafayette and Onondaga County allow this exemption, and they both allow it at a reduced level, nowhere near what the county will allow. So there's three flavors of this exemption. So wartime veterans, so veteran that served during a period of war, we get a 15% exemption up to a maximum, up to a cap. So for county purposes, it's capped at $36,000. If they saw combat, they would get an additional 10% exemption up to a maximum of 60%, $60,000, excuse me. So it would be 15 plus additional 10, 25. And if they are disabled, they would get an additional exemption equal to half of their disability rating. So potentially an extra 50%. So another up to $180,000 maximum. So a 100% disabled veteran could get a 75% exemption in this scenario, up to a max of 180. On the right is what West Genesee allows, 15%, but caps at $6,000. And then 10 and 30 for the other two add-ons.
Now, you can't piecemeal that, I'm assuming. If you do the exemption, you do the whole thing, like you couldn't pick and choose.
Not the three wartime combat disabled, right? If you opt into it, that all comes with it.
It's what it is.
Yep.
But could you set the limit the same for all three?
No.
Okay.
Whatever the limit you set for the wartime is going to dictate what the other two
Others are.
Okay.
So let me ask you, there was a question one time about Gold Star families. Is there any type of separate exemption for Gold Star families?
It would fall under the same exemption. You have an option. I didn't put it in this slide because there's the property tax law is kind of crazy. There's so many options. One of your options would be to treat them as veterans. So they would get this exemption, but for the purposes they're a
That would
veteran.
include everybody else to do it.
Right. So the Gold Star parent is, would be the veteran. Right?
So I'm just, there's nothing you could specifically do for a Gold Star family?
Not if
that
you
wouldn't-
don't already allow this exemption.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
So we did the same type of analysis here. For veterans, there were 1,664 total folks in the district who are going to get this exemption on their upcoming county bill for $77.3 million. There are none for school. So we did the same step through the school tax rate calculation to see what that would have done to the school tax rate. would have gone from $16.82 up to $17.16, so about 34 cents per thousand. So again, the same, assessed at 100,000, 200, 300,000, about $34 per 100,000 assessed values, what it would cost, if you were to go all the way up to what the county allows. It's a little bit more tricky to try to estimate what if you only went to what West Genesee did. I don't have those actuals, so what I kind of did was just assume everybody got a $6,000 exemption. So it might be a little bit more than that if you had some combat, some disabled folks, but would have lost closer to $10 million in taxable value, so not as impactful. This one's a little bit more of a guess, so I got the bolded underlying estimate in there. Would have cost about $4.30 per 100,000 of assessed value. And finally, the volunteer firefighter ambulance worker exemption. We had, for many years, an exemption on the books. We were one of a handful of counties that were even allowed to offer anything, but it was a flat $3,000. Oh, that's not true. It was a 10% exemption, but capped at $3,000 of assessed value, not $3,000 off of your school tax bill. So not a very generous exemption. I think when I know that fire departments in particular are struggling with recruitment and retention around the county, and the state saw this as a way of offering, little something for those folks who are volunteering their time and effort for the rest of us. So, we are now allowed to offer up to a 10% exemption for firefighters and ambulance workers. So on the assessment roll, there were only 4 parcels in Clay that have the old exemption. Not terribly generous on average. Those people were saving $50. So for all they do throughout the year. I imagine the reason there are not so many exemptions on the roll is that the state allows them, those volunteers, to take either the property tax exemption or the income tax credit. And I suspect, a $300 income tax credit is going to go a lot farther. So that's probably why it's harder to do this analysis. There are, I think, 66 total exemptions in the district on the upcoming county bill. I suspect there are more volunteer firefighters than that, but that's who's applied, and that's what's on there. So given the small universe of people, it's not going to be that impactful to everybody else, right? About 0.6 of a penny increase in the tax rate is what we were seeing. We lost about $1.5 million in taxable value. So not terribly. It cost about $25,000 is what we can shift it around. Super exciting.
I wasn't sure if anyone had any additional questions for Don. And like I said, we'll continue this conversation and get a sense of where the board's at. You've obviously received the emails from a few of our community members. And, he's the expert though, so.
If you think of something later, you can always email me.
I think Luke has a question.
Yeah, I have one question. You have some estimates on in-district individuals that would qualify for a lot of these exemptions. Around how many homeowners would not qualify for any of them? So I guess what's the overall N as far as our district population minus obviously all those that will? I'm just trying to think of
Everyone else, yeah.
So how many, what's that number of everyone else that's gonna basically carry the burden for those that are getting the benefits?
How many properties are in Baldwinsville School District? I don't know off the top of my head. I would say somewhere in the 10,000 to 50. I could get you that information, certainly.
I was just, looking at like 900 for the senior disabilities and
Yes.
and the veterans and just trying to compare.
And it's not just other homeowners that are gonna pick it up, it's every other property taxpayers, so vacant land, golf courses, warehouses, everybody else is paying more, right?
So if you can provide Tiffany or me with that information, we'll get it to the board in our Friday communication to them, just so that it can help further discuss the discussion.
And can I ask, what's the process from here? Would the board just need to adopt something, or is there something we need to go back to the taxpayers with to ask? No, we would just decide.
Well, Joe can correct me if this, and we have to decide, and we would have to notify, I guess, the county by March 1st.
You would have to adopt the resolution.
Right, we have to
March
do a
1st,
resolution, and make them aware of it by March 1st to get it into this year's tax.
And I don't know enough about how school districts pass resolutions. I don't know if they're required to have a public hearing beforehand. That would be a question for the law department.
I believe, so what we've seen, and we will obviously investigate this further depending on the direction the board would like to go, but I have noticed that most other school districts have held the public hearing prior to any adoption of a resolution. So I think it would make sense. We've done that for safety plans and everything else that we've done, the capital project. It would make sense to do that if we choose, or if you choose to go down that path. Tiffany was able to pull up the total number of parcels that we had in August, and it looks like 15,451 total parcels that would be taxable.
If you want to send me a draft of the resolution, I'm happy to look it over ahead of time, just make sure. Yeah, we're doing what you
Of
intend
course,
to do.
we
you know, kind of
certainly
stuff
would
like
do that and through our legal department also, so, yeah. Okay. Well, anything else from anyone? Thank you very much. It was
No
really
problem.
good
My pleasure.
information.
Thank you.
And I said-
We appreciate the
Thank you very
appreciate the
much.
information. It was great.
Thank you for coming out.
So we are now going to shift gears to the proposed 25-26 budget, and we've got all of our directors and program heads that will make their way up to the seats here that have a portion. So Corey, Rick, RJ, Chris Campolita, come on down.
Do you want me to go get them?
And Katie, you can come sit next to Carrie. So I will get us kicked off, and as we navigate portion of this presentation, we'll have each of the department leads give a quick overview of where they are and the major changes that we see with this proposed budget. What I will say is consistent to last year. What we found, because we still have a few unknowns out there, and this is only going to touch on what our expenses are. We'll get the revenue portion added to this picture at the work session on January 27th, which will help make it obviously a more rich discussion. But that being said, you'll see from the first slide here that this is what it is all about. The students and making sure that we're providing the highest quality of programming and services for our students and our athletes and our fine and performing artists across the district. Everything that we have that we're presenting this evening is aligned in one way, shape, or form to our district strategic plan. And we believe that the proposal that you'll see here, this first draft proposal, is allowing us to continue building, educating, and empowering all of our students and staff. So as you know, our budget development process is consistent to prior years. We start with the board adopting the budget calendar in September, followed by our virtual budget development meetings that we hold with public stakeholders. We put out requests for people to participate, and then we have those public discussions, more in-depth and detailed, line-by-line discussions with those stakeholders. That has happened in November, and then we're here obviously for the budget work session with you. That will take place in December and January, and then we're hoping to adopt no later than March 3rd the budget for the 25-26 school year. We'll hold a public hearing on May 12th, and then we'll have the public vote with Board of Education election on May 20th. So this graphic, I'm going to try to get a little smaller here so you can see everything. One of the things that we chose to do this year, based on feedback from our community, is to break out the fine and performing arts. So what you see on this slide is a, I guess, better picture of where we stand with athletics and the fine and performing arts. Typically, we present the instructional budget, student services, technology, athletics, transportation operations, administration, benefits, and debt service, and fine arts was added within the instructional budget. So Renee will talk a little bit about that later on this evening. But what I think is important to point out here, when you look at those dollar figures that are associated with athletics and fine and performing arts, and then you break it down based on the per pupil expenses. Even though athletics has a larger budget, you have more students participating. If I remember correctly from my notes, I believe we spend about approximately $1,600 per student athlete, and we spend about $1,900 for the fine and performing arts. Somebody can check the notes because I don't have them right in front of me. It's either that or it's $1,600 and $1,300. But I think it's important to point out that we have spent significantly. I was right. Fine and performing arts is $1,929 per student, and athletics is $1,690 per student. And how we're coming up with that calculation is the dollar amounts that you see there, and divided by the number of athletes and the number of students that participated in the fine and performing arts for one complete cycle, which would have been last year. We pulled those right out from our data dashboard. So there's the breakdown for this budget proposal, and we will get right into some of the specifics. As I mentioned before, this is why we do it. It's for those 5,389 students based on our current enrollment that are engaged in our programming day in and day out within our schools. And I will turn over to Renee, who will talk briefly about the instructional budget and the changes that are being recommended there.
Okay, so we start off with the number of staff. So this is a people business, right? So you saw we have almost 5,400 students, and it requires a ton of staff to manage those kids. So we put together our staff numbers at this point, with obviously our largest number being with our teachers, 433 teachers. So when you look at the instructional budget, obviously we have the largest budget because people cost money. So the first one is 2010, and you can see Sarah put in some really nice pictures of the students there, and we'll take a look at the 2010 budget. That is for the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Office. That's the office that is right in the district office, as you all know where that is. Those are the people for myself, and also the conferences, meetings, travels, things like that we send our folks to in my office, materials and supplies. So those have remained pretty consistent. You see a slight increase of $6,300 for that particular budget. The next one, 2020, is supervision. So I put some notes in there so you can kind of see where those budget codes go to. So this is these are our principals, our assistant principals, our directors. Those are all of our Baptist unit members. And so it also includes our clerical that we have in the curriculum office, as well as building secretaries. And obviously our principals, our directors, are on the road between buildings, so we have our mileage included in there, as well as office supplies for the main office. I did note in there that we went down a little bit in our clerical and building secretaries line, but you'll see just a 1.7% increase in this area for supervision.
Part of that reduction was we've had a change in some staff, so there's been some retirements and hiring folks at say entry level.
The next one is 2070. So this is our budgets for our professional learning and our learning coaches, who do a majority of our professional learning here in the district. So you can see how, where I've kind of highlighted here, the instructional salaries. That went up due to our summer enrichment program that we have. So we have the 2 weeks programming, and we've moved to, obviously we've taken a full day approach to that, so we can try to mimic, you know, a full day camp experience for students. So you'll see that increase there. And some of our other things that we use for training would be inclusive schooling, which is something that we've been doing for several years now. Our learning coach, when they do their trainings, they need materials and supplies to provide for the teachers and the staff. And then our BOCES services that you see there is just an example. You're familiar with Super Eval, that is there in that line. And obviously, because we still are looking at initial requests, once those BOCES services get finalized, then these numbers obviously will change.
So Renee, can I just ask you about that 150 line again? So you said a lot of that is the summer camp, but didn't you do a full day this year?
We did do a full day this year. I guess I'm looking at next year and how we might be doing a little bit differently for that.
Yeah, so we're not getting the grants that we received. Remember, we were paying for the summer enrichment through the American Rescue Plan and all of those additional grants that we received as we worked our way out of COVID. All of those grants are going away. So in order for us to continue, we found benefit in having those options available for our families and for our students. We would need to share in the full costs of those programs as opposed to use grant money. That doesn't mean that we won't try to get additional grants. You know, like the Recubs grant we've been able to secure. We will certainly try to do everything we can. But without a definite, we had to budget for that year.
So our next one, 2110, this obviously is all of our teachers that you see in this budget area. So there's a lot going on here, so I did put in some notes so that you can see. I did highlight a couple of areas where you might see a larger increase. So the under the 150 for instructional salaries, security, since we've got security in all of our buildings now, and we also have security after school for all events, you'll see quite a bump in that. A lot of that's related to just providing that security for those events. And if you look down a little bit more, you'll see our lunch and our playground monitors, that went up a little bit. We have some equipment. You'll see in later on when I talk about fine arts, a lot of our equipment obviously now is going through Arts and Ed, so we pulled that out, but you'll see a decrease there. Our SRPOs are also in here. You'll see just a slight increase in that. Our materials and supplies, line 450, those are our building budgets. So that every year goes up, but I think that's also an area where we look at and try to make some cuts in those areas. And what you'll see is a 2.4% increase in this particular budget area. The next one, 2280, these are our CTE programs. So you'll see a 6.1% increase here. Currently we have 102 students who have seats in the CTE programming at BOCES. So, you know, if you probably are familiar with New Visions, this also includes, I believe, the one seat, although I think we do have the option to get more seats for the new STEAM school that is scheduled to open in September of 2025. So obviously there's a process for students to apply for that if there is any interest. So that budget has slightly gone up.
So that was exactly the thought I had, as I saw that STEAM is gonna start accepting. Will that cost us if they want to, if we end up going to STEAM?
It will,
Yeah.
$25,000, which is more than what our CTE full-day programs, new tech programs are. One of the shifts in this STEAM school as they work their way through it, it's really intended to be a full school experience. So even though they are Baldwinsville students, the way it worked with the legislation in order to get this through, the intent is that extracurricular and other activities, athletics, they would all be attending and participating on the teams or the clubs that are affiliated with the STEAM school. Yeah, they wouldn't be here as it stands right now. That's certainly going to take some time for them to build up. I don't know if there will be the interest. It's a little bit unique in the sense that if you drive by that building downtown as well, it still has plywood over so it's not going to be completely finished. So it'll be interesting to see how many Syracuse City students as well as suburban and rural school students take advantage of that program as they start to grow that. It's a little bit different than when BOCES started the new tech schools or the innovation tech or Seven Valleys, because we were more a part of that design from the start, where this is a little bit different given how the legislation came through. But we are able to get aid on that as a BOCES coaster.
Same as the BOCES state.
Yeah, the BOCES coaster, yeah. So we'll see, but we are, I mean, what makes that school unique is that it's supposed to be comprised of 60% Syracuse City students and 40% everybody else in central New York, from school to school.
So with this section, you're just anticipating the costs are gonna go up, but not the number of students that will participate?
So I don't want to jump in, but one of the things that is unique, it used to be where we would budget a certain number of students, but 2 or 3 years ago, the superintendents, we all agreed with BOCES and business officials to change the process. So they have like a 2-year average, so that it basically doesn't allow for there to be as much with ebbs and flows in the budgets for schools, because there were a lot of smaller schools that had issues with that. So it's based on that average. So if we add more students, we'll see certainly a larger increase the following year, but it's not going to be as significant if we were to say this year we're adding 30 students compared to the 102 that we have now. So I think you know, this is consistent. And if it drops, then it will drop. And we have not turned students away recently. So I think that's where in the past we had to kind of earmark a certain number and go from there, but we've gotten a little bit more flexible because of the new method of calculating our annual costs.
Okay, we are on to 2330. This is teaching, it's called special schools, but it's really regional summer school. So you'll see an increase in there of 23.1%. For this year, we had a number of students attending taking Regents exams, maybe not necessarily going through the summer school program, but attending the review sessions and retaking their Regents exams in an attempt to get higher scores. So that definitely went up this year. So we're just kind of bumping that number up for next year in anticipation of potentially seeing some of that again. Also, our special ed students that go and have accommodations that need to be made, so those accommodations require staff and people, and so, so we just wanted to make it more in line of, anticipating some of those numbers going up.
I think one of the other things that we also see, last year, the summer school was at North Syracuse for the high school. This year, it will be on one of our campuses, which means historically, we tend to get more students attending when it's here as opposed to taking the bus or other transportation out to the North Syracuse site. So part of that increase is in anticipation for potentially more students. We're not gonna know, so if we don't utilize it, it just goes to fund balance.
2510 is preschool, and we all love our pre-Kers because they're so darn cute. So what we have here is, obviously you see a huge bump in our teaching assistants here, and that's just in anticipating the needs of potentially having TAs, maybe losing some of our grant funding for those positions as well. So obviously, if those TAs do not come to fruition, that will just generate some fund balance for us. The next one is 2805, attendance. You'll see our attendance officer here is accounted in this budget line, and the BOCES services essentially is School Tool, which is our student management system. And so that takes, we do a lot through our School Tool programming, so we see anticipating a 4% increase here. 2850, these are our co-curricular activities. So you'll see that broken out with the advisors for these activities. And you'll also see there's some after-school supervision there. So some sports study halls, things like that, where they just need some oversight before they head off to their various practices and things like that. So here we pulled out anything that was related to the fine and performing arts, because we put that in that separate documentation. So you don't see anything here related to that in these numbers. So we're at the instructional summary here. So we're looking at just a 3.6% increase in this budget from this year to next year. And if there are no questions, I can move right into the fine and performing arts.
Quick question, Larry. I kind of got this flavor going through this earlier. Do we have any sense of some of the things that look like an increase in our budget are actually sort of transfers, just shifting dollars where granting or aid is going away, we're taking on that burden. Do we have any idea of like what that lump number might look like? How much of this is sort of us replacing a grant or some sort of aid that's going away?
So the number that you see there, well, not there, but a few slides back on the, when we were talking about, that's pretty much it right now, from what I can recall, because that was the only additional option that we provided for students that was covered through those other funds. So we can get you that exact number and we'd be prepared to talk more about it, but that, I would say, focusing in on that line, I don't believe there's anything in the student services budget that we're losing out at this point in time, assuming that we continue to get Title I and all those other funds.
Right, thanks.
I have a quick question too.
Yeah.
Because I noticed in there where it talks about School Tool, I thought that the Parent Square was kind of, or do those work together, or are they looking to replace each other, or how does that kind of work?
Parent Square is the communication tool that we utilize for messaging, emergencies, distributing grades, grade reports, report cards, etc. They work in conjunction with each other. School Tool is truly the student management system that we use to keep and maintain all of our records related to attendance, grades, discipline, you name it, enrollment, that we can't do away with. And so both are essential for us to continue operating, and one can't replace the other. Who knows, at some point there could be a student information system that does all of it, but at this time there isn't.
Well, because didn't school too all used to do communication stuff as well, or no?
School tool didn't, it was
Okay.
School Messenger.
Oh, okay.
Was the
Gotcha.
other system.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we take a look at the fine and performing arts budget, this is new this year. So we pulled out some numbers for you to look at the personnel related to that. So I think most of this is pretty straightforward. I think when you look at this in comparison to athletics, in terms of the stipend positions, you'll see a very similar. So if you move into where we've pulled out the numbers here, the 2110, that is our theater manager. So the person who runs the booth, runs the lights, supports all the practices. You'll see that salary there. Where you'll see some of the drops in the equipment, that's because a lot of this now is being run through Arts and Ed, and you'll notice there was that initial bump in 23-24, and then we didn't need all of those instruments because we had them delivered, we purchased them, but now as we're replenishing, all of that's going to go through Arts and Ed now, so you're going to start to see those numbers go up. I know an 103% increase feels very large, so sorry about that. The co-curricular activities.
Just to clarify that too, though.
Yeah.
Well, so for the arts and ed though, we get 75% of that
Yes.
return.
Yes,
Now,
of course.
when do we get it returned, and how does that show in?
So it's the
budget?
following school year.
Yeah.
In the revenue.
Yeah.
Which you'll see, you're gonna see what we're projecting, obviously, when
So
we get to that point.
that'll be on the revenue side from
Yes.
of this year, yeah.
I would also point out, it's a little bit deceiving there with 23-24 actual, because we also transferred some money in because we had received some additional
Was that grants, right?
aid. So that's what we actually spent. I would bet that when you look at what was approved as a 23-24 budget, that line wasn't nearly that high.
The last one there, the 2050, those are the materials and supplies for our fine arts performances, our field bands, because we've taken on supplying those materials. I see we have a bump here for next year because we are purchasing the uniforms for marching band. So those are expensive. So you'll see that kind of bump up there. And then the fine arts summary, you'll see there the increase, obviously, because of what the district has taken on in terms of making sure that our fine arts programs are supported and accounted for in our budgets.
I think what's important to point out, because it does look like there's a significant increase, and we had 80.7%, but go back to what the actual was in 23-24. So I think this shows that we're still spending around the same dollar amount that we typically had tried to spend, given the changes and the shifts that we've made. So 24-25, I think what was adopted isn't the truest of pictures. So we can shift to student services if you don't have any other questions for Renee. Okay, Carrie?
Okay, good evening. Again, I will, as every year, Rocco did, and I did last year, preface the student services budget discussion with talking a little bit about projecting money for this department. Can be a little bit difficult. Operating student services and special education specifically for the following year can be hard. We have to make reasonable predictions, and we tend to base those on students who are currently here or known to be exiting. But we know that students can move in and move out and can impact that, pretty significantly. Specifically for the special education piece, much of the focus is on what we call individual education programs, those IEPs and meetings that drive those haven't happened yet. They happen in the spring, so it's just a little bit, it can be a little tricky making those predictions. On these first few slides, you'll see we have students with IEPs, 504 plans, and students attending special programs that we support, and then the next two slides are the staff that support those students and programs. On each slide, you'll see a breakdown of salaries, contractual raises, equipment, supplies, and materials for each department. On this first slide, this 2250, those are supports for students labeled as having a disability. And here you'll note we're actually down just a little. You'll recall maybe from last year that we were up almost 15%, so we are more stable at this point. We have actually hired additional TAs based on student needs, but there have been some retirements and resignations that have factored into why that looks a little bit lower there. And additionally, we have not gone down in teachers, but we did have some retirements, which is where you'll see the difference there as well. Teaching assistants are very critical, part of special education services. Most of the time, teaching assistant support is recommended on a student's IEP. So again, it can be hard to determine how many of those we might need. And you'll see some pretty big variation there due to contractual raises, and then again, keeping in mind a student could move in or move out with that support. For non-instructional salaries, those are occupational and physical therapists. You will see an increase here, and this is the only place we're proposing additional support for next year. We have seen a steady increase in that need, specifically for physical therapy services. We have had to contract out this past year with an agency to cover some of our students who moved in over the past 2 years. We're not seeing or projecting any students with this service to exit. We know that we'll have students transitioning from preschool that will continue to need. So again, projecting that need based on the students that are currently here, we know there's going to continue to be that need, and so we've added a 0.6 position for next year at this time. One other thing to point out is we did an overall 4% increase for BOCES services. We're waiting for the BOCES final budget, so that could change a little, and we would update the board with that information in February. And then you'll see the tuition there. Contractual services are services we contract out for, so we have students sometimes on homebound that we might contract for services. We'll continue to do that. And then tuition, we have 2 lines there. Those are for students who are in residential placements, and again, those can be pretty significant costs. One student could absorb all of that, so we look to have a little bit of fund balance there. Oftentimes, one thing that happens in New York State is there are no students that are rejected throughout the state, and then when that happens, we have to actually apply to out-of-state residential programs, and that can be a little bit more costly. So we have to obviously keep a little bit of cushion there because we don't know when that will happen. On the next slide, you'll see 2810. This is our school counseling services. This was a shift, if you'll remember, last year to student services with a cabinet restructure. There is a teaching assistant on there, which is our career resource teaching assistant who supports our BEST program and acts as a coordinator for students that do job coaching. And that BOCES service test is for us, a test scoring service. Clerical support are supports that support that office. On the next slide, you've got 2815. This is our health services. This is also a shift to this department, and you'll see similar things here that you saw in the previous slides regarding salaries, equipment, contractual services, supplies, and materials. The next slide is 2820. This is psychological services. These are school psychologists. We have 9, 1 in each building, and then an additional school psychologist who acts as our preschool chairperson and district psychologist. And then they do have a special materials and supplies line for specific evaluation materials they need to complete evaluations. On the next slide, 28-25, this is our social workers, and we do have 8, we have 1 in each building. Next, we have pupil personnel services, and you'll see there was a shift in an administrator to that office into this code last year. Those instructional salaries, that money that is set aside there, we had shifted due to crisis situations, determining that we needed a fund to support staff in the event that there is a crisis. We had originally put some money for non-instructional salaries in there because we did have some non-instructional support for a few situations, and then we found that going forward that was sort of a unique situation, and we don't necessarily believe that we'll need that going forward. Contractual services, that line there is for students that sometimes or are hospitalized due to emergency situations, and we are obligated to, pay for their education while they're there, so we would contract with a tutoring service at the hospital. And then on the next slide, we have 9901, this says transfer special aid fund. This is for our extended school year service. And there had been an increase previously, which is again where you've seen some of that be more stable this year. We had added some integrated teaching classrooms the previous summer. And that brings us to the very end, which is the final total budget costs. As noted, there's a very slight decrease overall, probably will change when we get the BOCES numbers, I suspect, but we're stable. And it can be hard to predict these, keeping in mind these services do directly support students. It's not something we can always control. It's based on student needs, residential placements, teaching assistants, staff, crisis situations are all things that, we certainly hope don't happen, but we're in a pretty good place, a stable place as far as these services is concerned.
Any questions for Terry? And then we will shift to athletics with Chris.
Yes, so you can see in my little world there, we got we got 157 people working with me, and then obviously all the student athletes. A couple of the highlights that I wanted to go over for the fall is that we had 12 of our scholar athlete teams achieve a composite team score of over 90% or higher. We signed 13 student athletes in the fall. We do one in the fall, one in the spring, to Division I, 2 or 3 colleges to participate in athletics at the next level. We had back-to-back champions in Class AA with boys soccer, and then girls, it's three times in a row that won the New York State, or the Section 3 Class AAA championship this past fall. We had tennis, cross country, and swimming all had student athletes that won championships and competed in the state level championships this fall. Talking with Chris Ludden today, our diver, Nick Pombo, broke his diving record, and in the week 2 state rankings, our wrestling team placed an honorable mention for top 25. So the winter season's already off, running in a really positive way. So that's a little rundown on what we've done in athletics up until now. As you can see in this part here, we've got, this is the equipment money. You can see a big jump for the first one, the 200 equipment. We've got all the weight room equipment going into the new Durkee Gymnasium. So that will really be kind of a one-time purchase for the gym, hopefully for next fall. So that's obviously a big jump there. And the next slide, we have, really this is our intramurals, and it kind of just broke flat. So we're not making any jump in this budget code. And I would like to highlight, this is a lot of this is contractual, so that you'll see the increase go through that. But I do want to highlight equipment 200. I know some of you have gone on college campuses and seen the Avenue banners. They're on the light poles. We're looking to do that on our main campus with all the wonderful projects we have going on with the stadium, the new stuff at Durkee with gymnasium. So on each of the light poles, just about each of the light poles, they're gonna have a banner, whether it says Bees or Beeville on it, so that when you go up, it can kind of show our student pride on that, and our Beeville pride. So we increased that part. Again, that would be just a one-time purchase on that equipment. And then 490, you'll see a shift, and that is for adding huddle. So a lot of you, if you're watching our athletic events at the stadium and at the gymnasium, you'll be able to link into huddle and watch the live stream for our teams. With the new gymnasium at Durkee and the softball, baseball auxiliary field going in, we did add cameras to that, so you'll see the jump in that. But it is a great free feature. It's a free feature to be able to keep up to date with all of our JV varsity teams throughout the course of the seasons, and obviously with the new upgrade with the gymnasium at Durkee, auxiliary field, and baseball, softball field. It would be great to have those games streamed live as well. And I want to say the last slide is the overall scope of where we are with the budget. And as I mentioned, a couple of those big ticket items are just going to be a one-time purchase. And hopefully, obviously, next year we'll go down a little bit.
So one of the, before we shift, Chris mentioned about the equipment. So as we think about the Durkee project, the project that was approved in 2022, you know as a board and facilities committee where we are with the bids that came in. And so we built in the equipment for the weight facilities and the VOTPT and all that into Chris's budget as opposed to in the project, because we're trying to keep those costs down given some of the other expenses. If for some reason it changes and we have additional funding left, as we wrap up some of that work this summer and fall, then we certainly can make some purchases through the capital project, and then that would just turn into fund balance. But we're anticipating obviously not being able to do that. And with any capital project, I mean, that's why we went forward with some of the work with the additional funding through the American Rescue Plan to purchase the furniture at the elementary levels, because we know we can't do it in its entirety through a capital project. It would be nice to be able to do that, but unfortunately, it's just not always feasible.
Do we get any state aid on the athletic equipment like we do on the fine art? No.
No. There are some athletic codes that will generate aid, because we've tried to purchase as much as we can through BOCES, but the majority of that is not going to fall. I will say that Section 3 is looking at other avenues too, as they navigate things, because that is now run through OCM BOCES. We're trying to do our best to try to drive as much as we can through BOCES just so we can generate aid, but there's certain costs or certain restrictions with the COSERs that limit us from being able to do that. But I would anticipate over the next several years there could be additional changes to try to increase that revenue source through BOCES. We'll shift to RJ with technology. Okay, another question? Sorry.
Yeah, that one's asking anyway. Chris, I'm assuming like uniforms, helmets,
Yep.
stuff you need, that's all in that 200 equipment?
That's in the second to last slide, 450.
Materials and supplies.
Materials and supplies.
Okay,
So that's
I
my
gotcha.
fall, winter, spring equipment throughout the course of the year that I'll purchase, my coaches, and make sure we have equipment for the seasons.
So then, what's in the equipment line?
Say that again?
What's in the equipment line?
Equipment line is anything from cleats to uniforms, footballs, basketballs, training equipment for our athletic trainers. We'll purchase, any from A to Z with anything that our coaches are looking. I'll meet with them at the end of each season, and they'll give me the recommendations on supplies that they need. You name it, we'll look at purchasing it. If it's a big ticket item, you know, we'll chat about that, but that's where we can kind of put it in some of the other equipment slots as a one-time big purchase. But, you know, it's definitely, it really will cover all of the sports from modified to varsity with, you name it, what you need, pennies, you know, you can kind of go on and on with that, but it really does cover all that for them. That line does.
Great.
Does that also include the APE equipment?
The APE equipment would be on the first slide, and the 450 right there. APE equipment, that line right there is all of your elementary schools, PE, middle school, junior high and high school, and APE equipment is purchased from that line. And that's another situation where I'll meet with the PE teachers with what their needs are based off of the school year and purchase those items for them.
The student services also had an equipment line that includes bigger items, so for equipment over $1,000, that might include, like I'm budgeting next year for a tricycle, like for older students that are Baker, because sometimes they might use adaptive equipment that sort of goes back and forth between physical therapy and APE, so sometimes we work in collaboration to determine if it's a bigger item that I already know we need, I might put that in my equipment budget as well.
Okay, hi everybody. Some highlights up there, some kids using technology. I've noticed over the past 5 years, a big increase in media production by students. And I have to give a shout out to the library staff. They're really good at getting these kids in. Some of the products they've put out have won national awards, and they're in 6th and 7th grade. It's just incredible. But anyways, the next graphic is my department. Small department with a big responsibility. So really I have 6 people working full-time to keep the network and all the equipment running and functioning for the students to learn. So here's how the budget breaks down. The 2110 codes are equipment, and the 80,000 is for like if we need computer tables or whatnot like that. It's in the instructional code, but it's really for furniture and things like that. Sometimes, some years we spend all of it, some years we don't, depends on what comes up. The rest of that line is some of the services we purchased through BOCES. Again, we kind of take a guess at what those costs are going to be, and until the final requests come out, the BOCES can't give us an exact dollar amount. So we usually tack on 4% to that. So that's the increase there. The 2610, that's your library and AV codes. Everything's pretty stable in there. Increases due to contractual, some movement a little bit in clerical positions up and down, but all in all pretty close to what we spent last year. There's equipment for libraries, there's contractual codes. It's been very stable over the time I've been here for what we spend in those codes. Some shifts have come from buying more and more, less and less books, actual physical books, to more electronic versions or other materials for the library. It's just the way things are trending. The next code is 2630. That's really the computer instruction, computer system instruction. Must have been a shift in a TA or some salaries for that one line that got zeroed out. But the rest of it is the non-instructional, that's my folks that work for me. We have equipment, expenses, state-aided computer hardware where we get, I think, 70 or 80% back out of those expenses. Contractual, everything's pretty stable. Actually had a decrease in there because of some, the decrease in the non-instructional salaries. I had a couple people that had been here a long time that retired, so there's some breakage there. Mine goes quick. So that's about it. We're down a little bit, mostly due to those the folks that have been veterans in the department that retired and replaced by some newer people.
transition, over to Corey with transportation.
Good evening, everybody. If you look, our transportation staff is at roughly 148 employees with drivers, attendants, mechanics, office staff, and we added a safety officer in late August that joined us. We also have one additional, the sheet shows 2 dispatchers, but we finally filled our 3rd dispatcher position. So our office is filling out, and that's a great relief because we're very busy in that office. Just an overview of how many miles we drive, the number of school buses in the fleet, the number of routes, our inspection rate with DOT, thanks to our highly skilled mechanics. And obviously, we're very much 100% student-centered on what we do in the building. If we look at the 5510 transportation services, there are a few things I'd like to highlight because there are increases, just items that we are adding here. So you'll see an increase in the supervisor salary. That is because we have a chief officer in the district, and part of his responsibility is overseeing the transportation. And because he does oversee part of the transportation, that salary can be, part of that can be under the state aid. So we'll get state aid back for his salary. So that's why you see that in there, also with the addition of the safety officer in the district. If you look down, you'll see there's an increase in bus drivers' salaries and attendance. That's, a lot of that is contractual, but it's also because our district provides wonderful services for our students, and we go above and beyond with extracurricular activities and with the summer enrichment programs and sports camps that we provide transportation so that all students in our district have an opportunity to participate. Equipment under 200 there, you will see $70,000 there proposed. That is for a new safety vehicle. We currently have 2. Dr. DeBarbery has one, I have one. We do have a large district, and at times we have to respond to difficult situations to support our staff, whether it's a student that's unruly or whatever the case may be that a driver can't handle on their own. So we actually go out to those situations to help support the staff. And because of the size of the district, we find many times that we have the safety officers heading one way, I'm heading another way, and obviously Dr. DeBarbery is heading other ways too. So we have those. It's not only for us. Staff does have the opportunity to use these vehicles to get to and from conferences. If we go to our next slide, if I could turn the right way. The 5530 transportation garage. Most things are pretty consistent, other than we are looking to add a forklift in the garage. Currently we don't have the capabilities of using all of the storage room in our facility because we can't get items high enough in the garage. So this will help us with storage. It also helps, we can do a lot of in-house repairs. Our mechanics are very skilled in engine repairs in that, and we need to be able to lift the engines out of the buses and be able to put them off to the side, work on them, and then actually, transition them back in. So we have proposed to add that, and they run right about $32,000. The total summary for the budget is about an 8.25% increase from school year 24-25 to the 25-26 school year, which comes out to about $650,000. On our next slide, you'll see our proposal for our 14 new buses. We have to keep our buses constantly renewing them. We're on about a 10-year replacement plan with our buses to keep them safe. New York State DOT is very strict on the requirements for the buses. We do get about 120 to 130,000 miles out of our buses before we have to transition them and add new buses in. So we're looking at 10 full-size new buses, 2 36-passenger buses, and then 2 30-passenger buses with wheelchair capabilities. We do have a large number of students that require special transportation, and these vehicles will help us provide that. There is one more proposition here for the zero emissions vehicle, and Dr. DeBarbery can add more on this.
So what I would like to say about this is we left this slide in here, and obviously there's been some recent changes. Number one, that last line is listed there, the local share per year over the 12 years. The governor just recently signed the bill over the weekend, I believe, where it's now down to 8, so we'll be making that adjustment. And this is certainly left here for the board to consider, you know, given the fact that they haven't changed anything yet with the requirement that by 2027, all of our vehicles, all of our purchases have to be zero emissions. We know we were unsuccessful with this proposition last year, and so we didn't want to leave it, you know, we didn't want to assume anything. So it's listed here. We'll update the slide, but as the board continues to have conversations with all of us as we finalize our budget, we'll need to make a decision about whether we put another proposition up again for zero emissions, or if we just go with the standard internal combustion and leave it at that. We're not looking to have a decision today, but we felt we had to do our due diligence and at least put the information back out there. Because we did have some folks that were, you know, concerned based on the exit survey, if I recall correctly, that were upset that we weren't looking to purchase more than one or two zero emission vehicles. So we know our community stands, at least based on last year, they weren't in favor of this, but you know, that's something for us to consider as we move forward. No pressure out of the way, but we felt we had to at least bring it to your attention.
Joe, I find it, a message is being sent to our people up in Albany, because our district voted it down, Dryden, I believe, voted it down, and 3 weeks ago, Onondaga had 2 buses at zero cost to the taxpayers, and that got voted down. So hopefully Albany will get that message.
Yep. I think from our perspective, I mean, whether we make the decision, and I hate to see things go down, right? Personally speaking, given the success that we just recently had, but you know, that's certainly an area for the board to consider. I don't know where I can't imagine our community's perspective on this has changed that drastically over a year's time, but given the fact that you know, it's now down to 8 years, which is more along the lines of a life cycle of a vehicle, maybe people would feel differently. I don't know, but maybe things will change with the governor's proposal and whatever the legislature signs in this new budget cycle. So definitely a lot more to come for the board to consider. No pressure either way. We just felt like we had to provide you with the information to make an informed decision. Last but certainly not least, we have the operations budget.
Good evening, everyone. Up there is the slide of all the people that keep their ship floating, sometimes literally if the toilets are floating. If we scroll down, capital outlay projects, we do have one proposed for next year. That's the 100K project that we do every year. It would be over at Baker, looking at some stair treads in the main entranceway, looking to get those taken care of because they're pretty chewed up now that that's become one of the main entrances with all the salt that we've been having. Other things you see there is our building square footage. I would put and counting next to that because we are growing, especially over at Derby, and we'll get that gym up and running in the fall next year sometime. So. For operations of the plant, some of the highlights here, the supervisor salary, like Corey said, part of my salary is coming out of transportation because I am working in an umbrella role over there a little bit, providing some guidance to Corey, as well as providing guidance to our assistant director of facilities who came on last spring. And so that's reflected in the supervisory salaries. One other note I wanted to make is on the 450 code.
down there. There's a pretty significant increase there. One thing we're looking to do, and we have been doing over the last couple of years, is upgrade to our building radios. Previous to this, they've all been, we had VHF with UHF. Every building had different frequencies, couldn't talk to each other. We're standardizing that across the district, going to all UHF. So if there's any big event that everyone's coming to, they can bring their own district radios. Also, if we needed to roll to a specific channel where everyone's talking on them at any given time, we could do that. Currently, we have Baker, Durkee, and Eldon that is left to be replaced, and we'd like to get that all done with next year's budget. So that's one of the reasons that went up significantly. On the next slide, the 1621 codes, this is our maintenance and grounds codes predominantly. If you look at the 200 code, the equipment code, that went up significantly. All of our vehicles are on a replacement plan with the grounds crew, but our maintenance vehicles, they get a lot less driving than what the grounds crews do. One of those vehicles, I believe it's a 2004, is definitely due for replacement. So we did have an extra vehicle budgeted. We're budgeting for replacement because it's in dire need of being replaced with that. Also, if you drop down to the 400 code, the contractual code, there's been an increase with that. Some of that is with, we went to cellular communicators for all of our fire alarm systems, as well as our elevators, as opposed to the old POTS lines that were outdated. So there is a monthly fee associated with that transition. And then also, there's a little bit of an increase based off of field turf maintenance, because we are increasing the size of the field turf that we are having. So that's represented there. And then in the 425 code, the electricity, based off of the consortium and the rates that we saw this year, we felt the need that we needed to increase that. It had been previously higher, we dropped it down, but then based off of our current rates, we feel we would like to have a little bit of buffer built in there based on that.
How much of that is based on that?
I know Tiffany and I, we've been looking specifically as the bills are coming in. We get basically every 2 months we see it, what we're seeing, but we're seeing a significant increase from what we were paying last year.
Yeah, the NISMIC consortium went out to bid and received new rates starting in April. So we saw a significant increase basically after the budget was in place for the current school year. So we were able to actually pay our initial, because the consortium, they don't bill monthly, it's maybe 4 times a year.
It's 6, I believe.
6, yeah. So they base it on the billing at that point. They do initial bill, they send out in June. So we were able to give an initial bill in prior to the school year commencing, since our budget was already in place. So that allowed us some room in this year's budget for the increased rates, but they only locked in for 2 years.
I believe so. Yep.
So they'll actually be going back out to bid this school year, or next school year? Next school year.
Next school year.
Yeah.
So when you
the
say
rates-
significant increase, you say on a fairly regular basis, you're seeing a 31% increase in those bills?
Yeah, we were locked in at a substantially lower rate up until April, and so we saw the rates increase significantly. But we're hoping that, come next April, we'll see that maybe level out a little more.
Are we still
We're planning.
Are we still better inside the consortium?
What's that?
Are we still better participating in the consortium?
Oh, yeah, there's, I think over 60 municipalities and school districts that participate, and they have great buying power.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not trying to pick on it, I just,
No.
that number jumped out at me.
Absolutely.
It should go down a lot when we get all electric buses.
Yeah.
So I would assume that $795 is very little fund balance baked into that. That's what we're anticipating the cost to be for the 25-26 school year.
So this reflects an overall increase of 8.64%. And if you guys have any questions, I can answer.
So, well, you go ahead. Oh,
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even know if this is appropriate now, but there was a time when I think we had, in terms of safety plan, Joe, made sure law enforcement had building layout stuff. As we're changing and building, is that still something we keep up on?
Absolutely. The safety plan is something that we review every year, and we have to submit it to the state every year. But also, it's a living, breathing document, so if there are significant changes that are made, we do update the safety plan throughout the year. And also, if there are significant changes that need to be made, we do submit that to the portal, especially if that involves our building layouts. But on our safety committee, all of our SROs, all of our SPROs are invited to those meetings. They have those meeting minutes, and if they're updated, yes.
Great, thanks.
I just was wondering about that football game on Saturday. Did the right team win?
Yes, the right team won.
Oh, okay, just checking.
Thank you.
He's a name.
All right, so last but not least, we have the admin, benefits, debt, and capital portions of our budget. So Tiffany and I can chime in as well, but obviously you can see administratively, this is the district level administration that are ultimately working with the business office and human resources office to manage our district.
So here's the 1010 code, which is the Board of Education. So any contractual conferences and material supplies, as well as the 1060 code, which is the annual budget vote and the contractual costs associated with the vote, remaining relatively level with the current year. And then this is the 1240 code, which is our chief school administrator, the superintendent's office, and staff in that office, as well as contractual services, conferences, and material supplies related to that as well. This is the business office, 1310 budget code, which includes my salary as well as the clerical staff in the business office. Also some minor equipment if needed in that office, as well as contractual conference and meetings and travel. BOCE services, which is mostly our financial software system, is incorporated in that BOCE service budget. The 1320 code is our auditing services, includes our external auditor, our internal auditor, and our claims auditor. We went out to RFP for those services in 21-22, and we'll be looking to RFP again in 26-27. But those services remaining relatively flat are tax collection, which is the towns that do our tax preparation with our bills and invoicing. The 1380 includes our financial advisors, remaining relatively consistent, a little bump up because of some more of the financing and project work that they've been working with us on. And then also the 1420 there, legal services, remaining relatively level. This is the human resources budget, the assistant superintendent in that office and the clerical staff, as well as contractual services, conference and meetings, materials and supplies, and some BOCE services associated with that. insurance, we did go out with an RFP for insurance in 2022, which helped us keep that budget relatively flat. We are projecting a slight increase for next school year. And we also have our school association's dues in 1920 remaining relatively flat, which includes our school board's dues. And then we have our 1950 assessment on school property and refund of real property taxes, so any reimbursements that need to be made through the year from those budgets, as well as our BOCES administrative costs. So this is the BOCES administrative fees associated at BOCES. This is our portion based on our resident weighted average daily attendance of students. So we did a 4% projection on that as well until we get our finalized BOCES figures. And then the overall administrative budget increase is 0.15% or $5,363.
So just a quick question, just in my head, just rolling back to that line from the superintendent's office there. How much electricity does that use? How much do you need?
My lights are off, so I don't know.
Get my oil lamp.
They're LED.
Yeah.
We'll work in the dark.
And then, so we'll be rolling into our benefits and debt service with some highlights. You know that we're currently working on a $32 million project at Durkee, which commenced in the spring of '24 and is ongoing. We have the $63 million project, mostly at Baker, that was approved in May of '23. We have already begun construction on the multi-purpose field, which we hope to have ready in the spring, and then we have renovations are anticipated to start in the spring of 2025 at Baker High School. And then we have our recently approved capital project, and we're anticipating phase 1 renovations at Ray, Van Buren, and Eldon to commence in February 26th. And then we have our annual bus replacement plan, and then we also, as we discussed earlier, zero emission vehicle, if we want to look at that for a proposition for the upcoming vote, and then our benefits. So I do have some notes in this area, but going into benefits, the retirement, the employees' retirement system is looking to increase from 15.2% to 16.5% of salary for the upcoming school year. And then the teacher's retirement system is going from a 10.11% to a range, they have not finalized a rate yet, of 9.5% to 10%. And then we have budgeted currently a 5% increase in that area. As we know, we have some contracts that are not yet finalized for next school year, so these are projections that we have currently. And then we have workers' compensation, unemployment benefits, and disability. There is some leeway under unemployment and disability. Obviously, we want to prepare for expense. You'll see there's an increase there. There is also a corresponding increase for the building aid side, which we will present in January. And then also you will see transfer to capital fund for the capital outlay project, which Mr. Fodor already presented on. So overall increase is about 11.5%, or $5.3 million. And then the overall budget to budget is 6.7%, or $9 million at this point in time.
So as we mentioned before, I mean, our goal obviously is to continue to whittle that down. Hopefully you'll see some changes at our January 27th board work session on the budget. But when you really think about what are those drivers, you know, we've got our contractual salaries, we've got our OC services being increased by over $1 million, benefits at $2.46 million, debt service at 2.9. When you look at debt service and you look at OC services, about $4 million total. Remember, we're going to also see a change on the revenue side because of aid generated for both the OC services and our capital, debt services. So hopefully those will balance off. So what are our next steps? As I mentioned before, the January 27th work session, budget adoption by the board, and then following that, once the board adopts our proposed budget, we will then work forward with community outreach presentations and presentations for our public hearing, with hopefully a successful vote on May 20th.
So February would be an adoption time?
February-ish, possibly, no later than we can get away with the first meeting in March, but I think this year we had it adopted in February because we were in a good place, but it's a little bit of that unknown, not seeing the governor's budget at this point and knowing where the legislature's going with the changes in foundation aid or the recommended changes from the Rockefeller Institute as well. So we might have to wait until March, but the sooner we're able to adopt a budget, it's just going to make it easier for us moving forward. And I think we have enough, barring any major shifts with reserves and other allocations, that it will be fine no matter what we do. But we can have that conversation with you on January 27th. Or you can give us more direction based on what we anticipate those revenues to be. So are there other questions or concerns or areas you'd like us to focus between now and the 27th?
When I think about the revenue, it's hard to really go forward. You guys presented it very well, and we look forward to the 27th where we can really look at revenue versus what we're proposing.
Yeah, I agree. This was very informative. It's nice, good way to put it together. So it was a nice review of the budget. Also, when will we have an idea on tax cap? That will come after the budget, right? So it's gonna be a while then, possibly.
We'll try to get that to you or anticipate it as soon as we think we can. We might have a little bit more on the 27th. Tiffany's pretty good about that.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then we'll complete our work session for today. And thank you everyone for your presentations, and thank you for coming. So we'll take a very short break, and then we have a short special meeting.